Hi guys, how's it going? Brandon here, and today we're talking about shad, specifically threadfin versus gizzard shad. I've got some really cool things I want to get into, kind of showing you the difference between the two, and hopefully give you some insight so you can catch more bass. That's the whole goal here, obviously, all the time. And I also have some graphics, cool graphics showing all that. I have some Livescope video of bass feeding on shad and where shad are sitting in the water column. So just a lot of insight on how they move throughout the season. And hopefully by the end of this video, you'll kind of have a pretty good understanding of shad and catch more fish. So let's get into it. Okay, so shad make up about 75% of a bass's diet, depending on the body of water. So that's why this is so important to understand the differences between these two types of shad, which are the main shad that I'm going to go over. There's other shad, but these are the most popular that are in the lakes that produce a lot of big bass. So I think it's important to understand them. I'm going to teach you in this video how to identify them, kind of spawning facts about them, how they can operate throughout the spawn. And then just some behavioral and seasonal traits that you can relate to fishing of where they're at and to help you ultimately catch more fish. And once you understand these shad more and where they kind of live throughout the year. Okay, so first on identifying the gizzard shad, the name, why it's called the gizzard shad, because it actually has a gizzard, which is full of rocks and sand that help them grind up the food, bacteria, all the just junk, basically trash that I want to say, on the bottom of the lake that they suck up through their mouth. So they are bottom feeders. To tell what a bottom feeder fish, just looking at any fish, if the nose extends past the lower jaw, in the case of a gizzard shad, that means they feed on the bottom of the lake. Their fin, they do have that long dorsal ray extension, which the threadfin has as well, but just wanted to point that out, that they both have those, so it's not a really good way to identify or separate the two. Their tails are silver in color. They do have a spot on them, not as pronounced as the threadfin spot, but it is there. Here in this graphic, it's a little more pronounced than what's showing on the real shad there. There is a small dot, but I think the threadfin, their dot is a little more pronounced, but I think it also depends on the shad. Air bladder. Yes, they do have an air bladder, so they can kind of stop swimming, floating. I think that helps them regulate to stay on the bottom or float up off the bottom. Their color, it's silverish. They have a blue-gray back, a lot more muted than we'll see with a threadfin shad. The size of these things is the big deal. They can grow up to 16 inches, which is a very large fish, bigger than some bass. The world record is over 4 pounds, so these things can get pretty big. Another thing to keep in mind, if you have a pond and you're thinking about stocking gizzard shad, if you're going to, you want to make sure you have a very well established size of your largemouth already that can feed on these, because they can quickly come invasive and take over a pond. So as you'll see, threadfin are probably the better pick for that, depending on the area you live. Okay, so the threadfin, why is it called the threadfin? Because of that long dorsal ray extension, which is the same as the gizzard, but as you can see, it's falling down in this one, but it does have that long thread-like fin, is why it's called threadfin, off the back of its dorsal fin there. With these, their lower jaw does extend past that upper nose or upper jaw, so they are going to feed higher up in the water column. They're going to feed on plankton that's floating through the water. They're going to typically live up higher in the water or kind of suspended out throughout the water column. Their tails are golden in color, so different than the gizzard shad. They have a golden tail. They do have that spot, like I said, a little more pronounced in my opinion, but I think, again, it depends on the shad of how pronounced that is. They do not have an air bladder, so they constantly have to swim. They can't stop swimming. They're silverish, and they can be lots of different colors: blue, black, purple, green, just kind of more reflective than the gizzard shad. That's why there's so many different bait colors, crankbait colors, because of that reason. But these don't get up very big, up to 7 inches. That's pretty rare. You're probably not going to see that. 6 is even probably the top, but they really don't get very big compared to gizzard shad. So they get easier to eat, and they're probably better for ponds because of the size they get. Okay, so here you can see them side by side, the gizzard shad. Again, that nose goes over that lower jaw, threadfin. The lower jaw goes past the nose. So if you're out on the lake and you happen to hook one, or just curious if they're in your area, that's how you identify them. You can tell by the tail. They're a little bit more golden on the threadfin compared to the silver gizzard, but the quickest way, because they do look quite a bit alike, even though they're kind of different in this picture, is to tell by that jaw. Okay, so where do they live? Gizzard shad can live pretty much everywhere. They don't feel the effects of cold water like threadfin do. Threadfin can only live in water that's usually like 42 to 45 is the kind of the cutoff for them before they start dying. And a good general rule is to look at is threadfin usually thrive below the I-40. That's just a general rule. There are, like Grand Lake, which I fish around me, is quite a bit north of that line, and that's like, I think Grand Lake is one of the furthest northern lakes that has threadfin in it. Okay, so patterns and traits of gizzard shad and threadfin. Threadfin, their lifespan is 2 to 3 years, not very long, because they usually get consumed before that because they don't grow very big. Gizzard shad, 4 to 6 years, and they grow very quickly in that time. And so a lot of that is because the size, they get so big that they become bigger than some of the smaller bass, and kind of the whole prey becomes the predator type thing because they're so big, so they don't get consumed. So they live a little bit longer. Plus, a lot has to do with that survival temp of the threadfin die off, even if they're around, and that we get a cold winter, they die off. Where gizzard shad don't. They can live under ice. Really, the only thing that kills them is stress. So if because of the cold temperatures, extended cold temperatures, their food source kind of depletes, and they basically stress because of that and die if they do die. They spawn in about the same temperatures. I have heard that gizzard shad will spawn in a little bit warmer temps, a little bit later than threadfin, but I think they kind of all spawn at the same time, roughly. Here in Oklahoma, it's May, June. Basically, as the largemouth are up on those beds and they're finishing up, the shad are kind of pulling up soon after that to do their spawning. The cool thing about threadfin is they spawn in the early summer, and then their babies actually spawn again in the summertime. So they have 2 spawns. They don't spawn as much as gizzard shad. Gizzard shad only spawned once, but the gizzard shad put out 250,000 plus eggs per shad, where the threadfin are 2,000 to 20. Okay, so again, the shad spawn, it's typically overnight or before sunrise. They're going to slide up there and do their thing real shallow against something, banks, rock stocks, and once they're done, then they'll slide back out in deeper water. The benefit to this, if you're there in the early mornings this time of year, those bass come up there and they hear that, that commotion of these shad popping to the surface. So their bass are very curious. So they obviously slide up and they feed on those shad. Crankbaits, spinnerbaits, bladed jigs, anything shad mimicking moving baits are pretty good this time of year. Okay, so after the spawn, this early summer, late May, June, these shad are going to finish up their spawn, and then they're going to go out to where they're kind of summer, I guess. So threadfin are going to slide out and be, suspended in the water column higher. Those gizzard shad are going to be more on the bottom, feeding on that stuff on the bottom. So you can kind of target both. As the summer moves on and gets pretty hot, those threadfin will actually sink further down in the water just to stay in cooler temps, and the bass will kind of follow. That's kind of what leads the bass out deep after the spawn, is to feed on those shad. Some of those, shad will stay up shallow for a while as that water is cool, and then they'll slide out deeper. As you're getting into the late summer, this is leading into summer, but as you're in the late summer, that shad is going to, the gizzard shad especially, are going to be forced up because, like we've talked about in some of the other videos, the thermocline. This thermocline sets in where there's no oxygen below the thermocline, so the shad is going to all sit right right on that thermocline line. They may get up a little bit higher, but roughly they're going to be right around that line because that's the coolest water in that late summer. So keep that in mind too. If you're sitting there grinding bottom and 22 foot or something like that with a crankbait not getting bit, well, let's take a look at your graph and see where that thermocline's sitting, because they may not be going deeper than 15 or 18 foot. So your bait's not even around fish or shad. Okay, as we transition into the fall, so here in Oklahoma, at least September time frame is that late September, when it's still pretty warm, that shad's still going to start making its way up. Those days are getting shorter, so most of them, not all of them, will kind of make their way up shallow. Those big bass will follow up there to feed. This is a really good time to catch them on the bank with topwaters. Topwater is kind of my key this time of year in that September timeframe, October, when they're up there feeding. Then more and more we're turning to the bank as the fall progresses into November around here, when they're really trying to feed up on shad before winter hits. And then as you get into November, they'll move up even shallower, and just that shad is kind of trying to get the last of that warm water before it gets cold, so they're up there shallow, and the bass kind of take advantage of that and feed up on the shad. Again, topwaters, crankbaits, spinnerbaits, there's so many options in the fall. Just pretty much shad color style baits is what you're going to go after there. And then as you transition into wintertime, and we'll get here in a second, we'll show you some Livescope footage from winter. But as you transition into wintertime, that November to December more is when they're going to start kind of going out, at least in Oklahoma. That early December, they're going to slide kind of like summer. They're going to slide back out deep. Typically in the wintertime over the summertime, because of that cold temperatures, they're going to be lower in the water column in those colder months. That shad's going to sit lower. That threadfins are going to be real deep bait, and then the gizzard shad obviously are deep as well. But the benefit of that is the bass stick really close to the shad. They're really on, starting in the fall through the winter, they're always typically around shad. So think about your little jig head minnows, jerk baits, swim baits, small stuff. Okay, so here's a couple Livescope shots in the wintertime, just cool, unique shots that you see in the winter. You can see here the water's 45, so it's pretty early winter. Up high, you have resting or sunning bass. When you get a lot of sun in the wintertime, shad will do the same thing, especially threadfin. They'll float up higher in the water column to kind of get that warm sun. That water column, top of the water is a little bit warmer when you get a couple or a few sunny days in a row. So those bass will just kind of rest up. And then you can see over to the right, this is a bass that's feeding on that shad that's across the bottom. All those little blobs are shad across the bottom. And that bass is basically going down through that shad and eating, and then they kind of come up and rest a little bit higher in that water column and just kind of float and suspend. Okay, another one, this is kind of cool because you can actually see the bass go up into the shad and make like the shad splits and circles around it like a little black hole. And then the other ones, the bass, there's a few bass just sitting up under the shad that'll go up and eat and feed in it. Here, the water temp's a little bit warmer, so I'm guessing the sun is the afternoon. As you can see, the sun has been out for a while, warming that upper layer, so that shad is hovering higher in the water. The bass are moving up higher as well to get that warmth. Okay, here again, you can see this shad scattered across the bottom, and then this bass that's moving down to eat, and you can see the shad kind of starting to flee from it as it moves down through. This one, just like a big ball of shad. This is probably a late afternoon as well. That shad's a little bit higher. All those bass, I can count 7+. They're kind of mixed together, all sitting below that shad. And then they, as they want to feed, they move up and eat in the shad. Okay, so coming full circle here, transitioning into the spring, March, April. Here in Oklahoma, it's early March. The shad actually start, and the bass as well, because they follow the shad, they actually start to rise in the water column. They come up from their deep kind of wintering spots. That upper layer is getting warmer because you're getting more warm, consistent days throughout the spring, starting in March, and they just start to rise up higher in the water column. And those bass just follow the shad. Again, you know, spinner baits, crankbaits, bladed jigs, as those bass transition up into the shallow, you know, closer to April, then it really gets easier to target those bass because they're up shallow with the shad and they're feeding up before they start to spawn. And then once the spawn happens, those bass they're not eating anymore. They're not interested. They're just moving up to spawn and kind of protect their babies. So those shad are kind of off out there by themselves for the most part. And bass, the one time a year, the bass really aren't related to those shad. All right, so I hope that video helped you, kind of give you some more insight on shad. But the one thing I wanted to remind you is keep in mind of the bait size in your lake. You want to match your bait to the size of the bait in your lake. If you're throwing a real big bait and the bait size is really tiny, well, the fish aren't going to bite it. Bass come very keyed in on that size of bait that they want to eat, that they're eating that day. So it's important to match that a bait. As always, guys, thanks for watching. If you haven't caught some of my other videos, kind of on bass behavior, thermocline, kind of the barometric pressure, got all that. And thanks for watching.